Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
Here I am again in this mean old town, yet you're so far away from me. Now where do you go when the sun goes down? Yet you're so far away from me. You're so far away from me. Oh, you're so far I just can't see. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. I am your host, Eric Hellberg. And you know, we're like Einstein over here, men. We're just passionately curious about all things pertaining to men. Yeah, we know we have responsibilities, but if you take away our passion, we can no longer be curious. And what is Einstein doing? The chalkboard set. He's feverishly scribbling. He's getting about as weak, and we have to do the same, man. So where do we even begin in this world going amok? Let's start off with a bad word, shall we? But when you hear that I am referencing, you'll be fine with it. How is that bitch, Ghislaine Maxwell, still sitting incarcerated, given a 20-year sentence? Oh yeah, Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Her father was offed by the Mossad because he was a Mossad operative working with MI6 and also our intelligence. That's your funding source for Jeffrey. That's how Jeff and President Clinton all got wrapped up and involved. Yeah, Hillary too. She was just on the womanly side. Bill liked the young women. Okay, that was the funding source. That's why when they went into that good old Manhattan penthouse, there was a beautiful, what would we call that? Likeness of Bill Clinton, an oil painting with him laid back on a Chase lounge. Blue dress, high heels. How sick is that? And Jeff, the whole time, Bill probably took it as an honor, was saying, I've got you, son of a, I've got you. But he couldn't live. Jeff was offed by the Clintons. Ghislaine, since they are compassionate people, was allowed to live. But the point that I'm getting to is she gets 20 years. Royalty were their clients peddling these pedophilic kids, taking part in monstrous act with kids. Bill Clinton was Epstein's best client. You have royalty. You have heads of state. You have actors, actresses, business icons. Yeah, you, Les Wexner, I should say. Yeah, Epstein's only client in his private management firm. All you people. The black book was found, but only Ghislaine Maxwell is the only one still there, and now removed from the public eye. But not one person who partook in this folly has been held accountable and or brought up on charges. Interesting. Pedophilia, the worldwide practice. Current president, Joe Biden. What's Joe been up to? Well, Joe realizes that he's in trouble at the polls. He realizes that his traditional voting base has completely turned against him. Now you know why tens of millions of illegal aliens, migrants, were purposefully flooded into the country and funded, because our United States House of Representatives has now passed H.R. 7109, which will give them direct monetary and congressional representation in these areas where they have been brought, traditional Democratic strongholds, urban areas, and now they also get accountability in the Electoral College. So if this makes its way through the Senate, we're sunk. So I guess when your voters turn against you, you buy you an entirely new group. Great job, Joe. We know you love America. We know that you want to continue your 50 plus years of public service off our backs and on our dime. And so what else does Uncle Joe do? He knows that he is disenfranchised with his stances and his policies. His traditional African American base, we will say black. So Joe decides at the end of last week to go to historically black college, and a prestigious one at that, Morehouse College in Atlanta, an all-male liberal arts college. He does the commencement address for these fine young men. And you know what he tells them? Despite them being there, despite them reaching to this level, despite them going on, and we are talking about a college, I believe they've produced an astronaut, a senator, a Nobel laureate, statesman, etc. He goes on to say to the men of Morehouse, as they call themselves, I'm paraphrasing, I pity you. You are coming out into the world disenfranchised with this degree into an American society that hates you. American society doesn't hate anyone of color, Joe. Only you do. You're the one who cavorted around with the grand exalted cyclops, meaning an esteemed position within the Ku Klux Klan of your party, Senator Robert Byrd, the longest serving senator ever in our congressional history. Your buddy. The only one disenfranchising African Americans and or blacks is you, Joe. In fact, you were talking about him up until when Barry got in office and you saw another avenue whereby you could grift and he became your boy. Right, Joe? You said he was clean smelling and articulate. And Barry started this shit too. How? Because, we know he had an African father. Barack Obama Sr. He was only in his life 2 years. Barry doesn't remember him. Dude left. He abandoned Ann Dunham. Okay, Ann Dunham was white. Her parents, who were white, raised you, Barry. Up until when an Indonesian came on the behest of our government to do some work here and met your mom, that being Lolo Sotoro, another skin color, Barry, Indonesian, and you went over to Indonesia to the madrasas for a while, and that's what made you say the Muslim call to prayer is one of the most beautiful things known to man. Great. I know you loved it. In fact, by the time you were raised by your grandparents at a school that cost at that time upwards of $100K per year, and we know you were impoverished, living the African American experience, Barry. Okay. By the time they finished raising you, you just moved on to another private school, Occidental College in Los Angeles, where you smoked crack with your Pakistani roommate. And that's where you really found yourself and decided you wanted to be a person of the people, by the people. I'm Barry Barack Obama. Okay, we get it. And by the time you finished there, which wasn't long, you made your way over to Columbia in New York. And you were deemed at that time an international transfer student. I'm not sure what ties you have to the African American community, Barack. I'm not sure which ones that Joe has. But you guys have concocted what you believe is a foolproof plan whereby you just repeatedly say that they are disenfranchised, and the only ones that derive any benefit from it, although you haven't taken part in any of this supposed oppression, are yourselves. You ought to be ashamed. You ought to be ashamed. All that being said, why don't we backtrack so we can go forward? After all, an election in November is afoot. An election for the heart and soul of this country, which is now bankrupt. Yep, morally and spiritually decrepit. No mention of God anywhere. No yearning for God at all. And how can that be when you're busy doing the work of the devil? Let's go to that call. Remember I did some episodes on Russia last week, I believe, trying to give y'all good and timely information. In 2016, Joe Biden called for the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor at that time. and he said that he was corrupt. Well, one of the reasons that he claimed that was because, what we all know, it just was never pursued. Papa Joe, the big guy, was getting a 10% cut off of Hunter's proceeds for nothing, just like many other Democratic elected officials' sons, and I went through them on the first show, From Russia with Love, making money being on the boards or employees of Ukrainian oil companies. In this case, it was Burisma and it was Hunter. Well, of course, that prosecutor was looking into that arrangement because we had a new regime coming into the United States in the form of Donald Trump. And therefore, under those auspices of which I detailed the phone call from Trump to that prosecutor and Zelensky asking, what the hell is going on in Ukraine? Just fill me in. We're trying to look into things. Excuse me, but I'm told you are corrupt. We have this pending aid I don't know anything about. And the left went absolutely nuts. What if I told you that Ukrainian prosecutor was also looking into, and how did I begin this show? Pedophilia. Who did I mention? The Democratic stalwarts you know about, Bill and Hillary Clinton. Who did I mention last week? The same people. More money went to the Clinton Foundation between 1999 and 2014 from Ukraine than any other country. I said Ukraine was their playland, the globalist playland. And now what if I told you that part of that conversation was with that prosecutor? What the hell is going on over here? What are you looking into? And I would like you, President Trump saying, to look into this matter with Joe and Hunter more. Well, Joe and all the power, meaning Barry and the people behind him, got this man fired, did they not? Because what was it that he was really looking into? All the things I've already described, but also a peddling operation that involved children. Therefore, a short synopsis. The Ukrainian prosecutorial general, the Ukrainian prosecutor looking into the Biden family, their dealings at that time, was deemed corrupt for doing so, and he had to be removed. Now, Ukraine's quite a distance from here, but old Joe and the power brokers behind him, they have an awful lot of influence, and they operate on a worldwide stage. Just look at the news. But did you know less than a decade later, we have an incident right now that no one is aware of right here next to our southern border. In fact, it's happening now in Guatemala. Oh, yeah. Did you know now President Biden has deemed the head of Guatemala's public ministry and their attorney general, Maria Consuelo, he has deemed them corrupt as well. That's amazing. What are they currently engaged in? They are currently engaged in child and sex trafficking on the U.S. border. They're looking into it because Guatemalan children, now remember, we have welcomed migrants from Guatemala en masse over the last several years. But these children are coming up missing. They're not making it to their destination. And now they are investigating allegations of sex and child trafficking. They go hand in hand on the U.S. border. But now, just like the prosecutor in Ukraine, who was determined to be corrupt because he was looking into real matters, now the Attorney General and the Director of Public Ministry for the country of Guatemala are now being told that they are so corrupt, our press doesn't have to have anything to do with them. Look into them. These are extremely bad people. In fact, you know what President Biden did? He talked to his buddies around the world. They are no longer allowed entrance. These are foreign officials. who can no longer, now you can let a terrorist into the country, but a foreign official, these two, have been deemed so inappropriate, so obnoxious, so bad, they are no longer allowed entry into the United States of America, whereby they have business and should be able to interrelate and cooperate. Did you know the European Union has also banned them from travel there as well? What is going on here and who all is involved? Oh yeah, baby. Let's just pour a little bit of fuel on this smoldering fire, shall we? We know when you pour a little bit of fuel, even if it's gasoline, man, you get a stench. Profuse smoke. It just all starts coming up. Those vapors are trying to ignite, but they're not quite there. So let's throw the match. Poof! March 25th, who did President Joe Biden have in his office? President Arevalo from Guatemala. 2 weeks ago, Anthony Dipstick Blinken went and visited officials in Guatemala. So for some reason, Joe Biden and his administration have a newfound concern with Guatemala. Now, we know for many years they've been bringing their people up. Oh, you betcha. In caravans, actually, from Guatemala and all those parts in between. So I'm going to give you a pause. You can laugh if you would like. Either Joe Biden has somehow found some new compassion for the people of Guatemala, or you can chuckle, wink, wink, nod, nod, yeah, or there is something else abrew. Now, before we go further, you remember that movie, and I've done episodes on this about, Sounds of Freedom with Jim Caviezel. And the organization behind it was what? Save the Children. We've talked about that. I morphed it into slavery. Was this slavery? Talked about slavery. Talked about pedophilia. We went into all these different things. Now, what if I told you at one time, Jill Biden, and we know that she is a warm and sincere lady, was on the board of Save the Children? And what if I just told you that law enforcement officials just raided a Save the Children outlet in Guatemala? Would that get your attention? What if I went further and told you that not only Jill Biden was on the board for Save the Children, a huge NGO, non-governmental organization with enormous influence around the world, and they have had operations in Guatemala for 30 plus years, but that Dr. Jill Biden was actually, she is no longer, for some reason she saw fit to recuse or remove herself as chairman of that board. Yes, the chairperson of that board and its international operations. And what if I told you that the warrant for the search and seizure of the office in Guatemala was signed by the AG, who they have said is now corrupt, with the briefs written by the public health minister that is also now deemed corrupt, who they no longer will allow to travel to either Europe and or the United States. And the premise of their written briefs and the search and seizure warrant was concerning the safety of Guatemalan children at the Texas border, and that they could be being abducted and or sex trafficked. So let's get it on even a little more. Everyone knows the migrant situation. We see it every day. Now, we know when migrants coming from Mexico, those are primarily adults. And I know for the better part, a lot of them are coming to find work. They are actually funded to do so. They're funded a hell of a lot more to move into our territory as opposed to staying in theirs. I understand those implications, but they are typically adults. What we are talking about here is child trafficking. Approximately 8 to 10% of the purely Mexican migrants are children, meaning 14 and below. But did you know this? That of all the migrants coming from both Guatemala and Honduras, 75% of those migrants are unaccompanied children 14 and below. Are you seeing a pattern? These kids are coming on their own, obviously, in the custody of someone. There are some adults. But when they leave that country, they are leaving without parents. Children traveling by themselves. All right? Hold that thought. Since 2021 through 2023, to save the children alone, there's many other NGOs involved. And not only in Central America, also across the border. Where is it that these migrant kids are being brought to? Primarily Texas is the conduit for Honduras and Guatemala. In those 3 years alone, Save the Children out of Guatemala specifically received $22 million in free money. That one organization, grant funding, because their job is to save the children. But the media, Western media, meaning our media, was told to leave it alone. A gentleman by the name of Robbie Starbuck was brave enough to get down there and interview the public ministry head, who I just told you about has been sanctioned and now had actions taken against him. And did you know, previous to this meeting, that same leader was told, do not do the interview. He received a courier message from the U.S. Embassy who said, if you do this interview, you were playing with fire, quote, unquote. Nonetheless, Mr. Starbuck and the head of the public ministry of Guatemala went further. In the course of their investigation, in conjunction with the Attorney General, who has now been silenced, they found redacted. Now, the names have been redacted, but they started finding payments before they were shut down. 80 payments to individuals in Guatemala. These payments, and there were a lot more, this is all they had access to, ranged from $20,000 to $40,000 per wire transfer. That's a lot of money even now and even here, much less in Guatemala. Who are these individualized payments going to in Guatemala, and what are they for? And did you know that since President Biden has taken over, his administration, and this is on our books, we just didn't know what it was about, has spent over $500 million in Guatemala. Is there a war in there like Ukraine? What is going on in Guatemala? Is it to save our children? Part of that $500 million package, they have individual payments, let alone the individual payments I just mentioned. How about $125,000 a pop for indigenous healers in the villages of Guatemala? I guess to get them mentally and spiritually right? Think witch doctors, medicine men. $125,000. Hell, I'll go down there and be a shaman. And did you know they've given $500,000 to support gender ideology in Guatemala? What in the... Are they trying to make the boys more feminine so they can use them? Or vice versa? Whew. Okay, let's wrap this up. It makes you literally want to retch, vomit. Here's what I am going to say. 75% are 14 years and younger, unaccompanied, coming up from Guatemala and Honduras. we are giving these people money. After the raid, it was determined that Save the Children has countless number of children that they really can't account for. They may have made it to the border of Texas. They're not quite sure, but here is one thing that is absolutely correct. The Director of Public Ministry and the Attorney General in Guatemala have conceded that they absolutely have no inkling whereabout, meaning this organization and the country of Guatemala. They have no idea where 85,000 children have gone. What has happened to them? It is as if they have disappeared. We are being run by a demonically led government. All the people that I just mentioned to you, both Clintons, Barry Obama, Joe Biden, are in it up to their necks and countless others. And I've also found where this same head of the public ministry in Guatemala issued a letter to our own Attorney General, our chief crime fighter in the state of Texas, concerning this matter. And I haven't heard one thing about it until I was cued into Robbie Starbuck's interview. And I don't like Ken Paxton. I think he's a devilish man in and of himself. We'll look into this and I will keep you apprised. So until next time on the Comfortable in Chaos podcast, I bid you bon voyage, my burgeoning flock.